Neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville, Virginia. Far-right groups such as the Soldiers of Odin patrolling streets in Canadian cities. Once you get over the shock of it, the first obvious question is why? What's the appeal? And what can be done to counter it? Joining us now to explore these questions in Atlanta, Georgia, Mia Bloom, Professor of Communication, Georgia State University, and author of Bombshell, Women and Terror. In Chicago, Illinois, Christian Picciolini, co-founder, Life After Hate, and author of Romantic Violence, Memoirs of an American Skinhead. And back here in our studio, Mubin Sheikh, former CSIS and RCMP operative and author of Undercover Jihadi, and Amarnath Amarasingham, Senior Research Fellow, Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and Senior Fellow at the Canadian International Council. It's good to have you two guys back in our studio here, and to our friends in Points Beyond, thank you for joining us tonight on TVO as well. I want to set up our discussion here this evening with a couple of things off the top. This Vice News piece went viral. There are few people who have not seen at least some of this. We're going to show a little snippet of Vice News's report on the ground at the so-called Unite the Right March in Charlottesville, Virginia. Sheldon, if you would, the clip, please.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Blood and soil! Blood and soil! Blood and soil!
Who drove how long to get here?
12 hours from our car. We've been driving from north of the border, so.
Oh, you came down from Canadistan. If I was doing the radical agenda in Canada, I'd probably be arrested for it, right?
Yeah, well, in Canada, hurting people's feelings is basically illegal. I mean, it's not really criminal, but
unless they're white males.
And let us go back in time to a 1940 book review by George Orwell of Hitler's Mein Kampf. The fact is that there is something deeply appealing about him, Orwell writes. Hitler knows that human beings don't only want comfort, safety, short working hours, hygiene, birth control, and in general common sense. They also, at least intermittently, want struggle and self-sacrifice, not to mention drums, flags, and loyalty parades. However they may be as economic theories, fascism and Nazism are psychologically far sounder than any hedonistic conception of life. All right, with all of that in place, Christian, get us started now, please. Let us try to understand the psychological appeal of joining a hate group. And this, I guess to do this, we're going to tap into a bit of your own experience. Why did you join, many years ago, a Nazi skinhead group? What did it offer you personally?
Steve, let me just dispel the myth right off the bat. I don't believe that ideology is what radicalizes people initially. I think it's a broken search for three very fundamental human needs: identity, community, and purpose. Frankly, we're living in a time right now where young people don't have a lot to hope for. If they can afford school, you know, they get saddled with debt. There aren't jobs once they get out. You know, it's kind of a hopeless time without leadership, without clear direction, at least in my country, in the United States. And young people are ambitious. They're looking for something to change the world with. And, you know, these recruiters from these organizations who recognize the distress and upheaval that's happening right now in our society are actively looking for these young, broken, marginalized, disenfranchised young people and promising them a really black and white solution to a very, very complex problem. And it's appealing to young people because it seems to give them the answers, at least the perceived answers, to the problems that they're facing.
Mia, build on that answer, if you would, by helping us understand why a particularly hateful ideology helps, apparently, young men find that identity, that community, and that sense of purpose.
A lot of what Christian is saying is spot on in the sense that you have people who are seeking to belong to something greater than just themselves. And so the ideology very often will come afterwards. In other words, most people assume you become ideologically motivated and become more and more involved in a group, whether it's a hate group or a terrorist group. And in fact, from hundreds of interviews that we've done over the last 15, 20 years, the reality is very different. Sometimes the ideology is learned afterwards. And so the hatefulness is almost irrelevant compared to the other elements, the positive elements that they think that they're getting from belonging to something greater. So some of the same incentives that an individual will have to join a hate group would really speak to these jihadis who are either joining ISIS or Al-Qaeda, or even we've got people in the United States and Canada that harken back and go join Al-Shabaab in Somalia, even though they've been living in the West for years. It's very similar kinds of dynamics, both push factors and pull factors. The push factors can be some of the things Christian mentioned, that they're feeling, economically insecure, or they're feeling like they don't have much hope for the future. But then a lot of the pull factors are the positive elements they think they'll get from being members of these groups.
Mubin, what would you add to that based on your own experience with this?
Yeah, I mean, just a quick quote, because we're talking about ideology and what came first, the chicken or the egg. Is it the ideology or the hate? Sometimes ideology is a driver, and other times it's a passenger with other psychosocial factors as the driver. So I think what all of us are going to try to say is that you can't just look at it as a one-size-fits-all solution. You have to look at it on a spectrum of diversity as we are human beings.
Amar, what would you add?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think there's a lot of research that says, protest movements or terrorist movements, a lot of people join for very non-movement related reasons, because my friend went, or my family was involved, or something like that, and they only went home after and Googled, what is ISIS, or how to join ISIS in Syria, and so on. And so people are getting a lot of emotional support from that ideology, but also that broader community of belief, whether it's the neo-Nazi movement or the terrorist movements.
Christian, let me do a little sort of psychological talk with you here for a second, only in as far as extremists, I gather, tend to score lower on what's called the integrative complexity scale. That is the ability to think about things in complex ways or nuanced ways. So I asked the flip side of that, which is how crucial is the sort of black and white thinking that is involved in extremism for understanding its appeal?
Oh, it's very important, because the MO of any extremist group or terrorist group is to blame the other for the problems that exist in your life. And those, what I think leads people to extremism are what I call potholes. And they could be things like trauma or abuse, addiction, abandonment, a perceived grievance, mental illness, chronic unemployment, poverty, whatever the case may be. And those things tend to marginalize people and push them to the fringes to look for acceptance in negative pathways. And the recruiters are very savvy at identifying these vulnerable people who are looking for answers. There have even been reports that some of these extremist groups are targeting the most vulnerable people by going to web forums that are focused on mental illness or autism spectrum disorder or even ADHD. So they know that because of the condition that they have, where it's a hyper-focus, it's a very black and white thinking, that they may appeal to these people who may not fit in real life.
Let me get Mia and Mubin on this next question, which is, if you look at that Vice documentary, and of course most of the evidence that we have in other things as well, it's not exclusively a male thing, but it's certainly overwhelmingly a male thing. And I wonder if there's any research on this, Mia, that can point to why that is.
One of the things that makes these groups appealing to young single men has been what a friend of mine, Ellie Berman, who's also Canadian but teaches at University of California, San Diego. He writes about the fact that many of these groups provide all these social services, but they also provide belonging. They'll almost be a matchmaking organizations. They'll provide you a wife. So I think it's important when we look at the Charlottesville videos, we also take into account that these movements are not just appealing to men of a certain age, but they're also bringing in women. And in fact, they're bringing in women in a very traditional role. And when you look at ISIS, you see the exact same thing. Women are not there to be leaders. They're there to be wives or mothers, to generate or to create the next generation of fighters in ISIS, or the superior race for the Charlottesville marchers. So the fact remains is that the groups are able to capitalize not just on feeling of belonging, and of course, Christian's 100% right. This idea of black and white is so appealing. It's one of the reasons why we see among the jihadis, not just educated people, but educated in the sciences, and a huge number of these individuals are engineers, because there's a right answer and a wrong answer. You don't want shades of gray that might confuse the recruit. You want there to be black and white.
Mubin, why so many more men than women?
Yeah, I mean, there are very good points that are being made about the black and white thinking and the engineers wanting a very definitive answer, switch on, switch off. And, there's been discussion on, the simple fact of testosterone, right, that males have, and we're generally more aggressive just biologically. When you look at most of the criminal offenses that are committed, it's males between 19 and 30-something. But I think what it is, it's trying to reimagine this utopian life, this utopian reality, whether it's reestablishing the homeland for whites or it's reestablishing, whether it's the ethno-state or the caliphate, it's the exact same thing.
How about this warrior myth? How does that play into
Well,
it?
I was going to mention that because we all have this warrior myth in all our cultures. In our own culture, you can't speak out against the forces. You can't be against soldiers. There is almost like a worship of soldiery and warriors and that warrior myth. And it's the same thing with jihadists, with white supremacists, and even within normal society. We look at warriors and fighters and soldiers as, the ones who are the most physically representative of us. If we're going to be attacked, these are the ones that are going to stand up and defend them. And that is one of the most, I think, attractive recruiting point. I know this was something that I did when I was recruiting people, is to push that idea that, listen, you are the chosen vanguard. You are the one who's going to act when everyone else is just talking.
Amar, let's look at the other side of it. What exactly is the appeal for women to be, in the vast minority in this environment, to essentially, be a broodmare, if you like, for the men who are going to go out in the battlefield and perform these so-called heroic deeds? What's the appeal for a middle-class person in North America for that way of life?
I mean, I think this is where kind of ideology is important, because a lot of these early conversations that were happening, for example, on 4chan, which is a message board where kind of the alt-right, the engine for the alt-right really began, this was a huge issue, right? This is why the neo-Nazi movement currently is such an anti-gay rights movement. This is why there's such an emphasis on male kind of fertility and producing the next generation of white people, because you're under attack, because Muslim immigrants and immigrants in general are replacing you, like this "you will not replace us" anthem. And so this idea of the male as being attacked, the white male as being attacked, the one that gave rise to civilization and all these kinds of things. So I think part of it is it's a male movement, right? And so the appeal for women is to say, much like with ISIS female recruits that we've interviewed, that they're part of this framework, that the original role that was meant for you as a male and a female has been taken away, has been underemphasized by Western society, and you're reclaiming all those roles, right? And so part of it is to say we're who we are meant to be, right? And so it can be a quite powerful galvanizer, I think.
Biologically, as opposed to socially. Yeah. Let's put this on the board right now. This is from terrorism researcher Scott A. Tran. And he said this last week: in our material world, we have underestimated or underplayed the spiritual dimension of human action. Doing so runs the risk of leaving ourselves open to people who are motivated by deeper spiritual and sacred values and virtues. And I think that's the greatest danger we face. Christian, can you pick up on that? The need for sacred values for ISIS supporters is pretty easy to understand, but does this need also apply to white supremacists or neo-Nazis?
Oh, I think that it's strikingly similar, if not identical. It's this whole narrative of, the white race is the greatest race that they provide to their recruits, and it's always about protecting something that's sacred. And just like ISIS or just like Al-Qaeda, it's about promising paradise to broken people who've hit a wall over and over and over again and are so desperate that they're willing to put aside, at first, the ideology just to belong, like Mugen said, and to protect this culture that they've revered, this European white culture that they say is being genocided by diversity and by multiculturalism. So they're really using fear rhetoric to scare people to try and protect something that they say is going away, which of course it's not.
Christian, let me do a follow with you. If the idea is to pursue something sacred, is it possible for the secular to be seen as sacred?
I don't As far as the movement goes, I don't think so. I think that they have what they call, a greater sense of duty, this mission, to save the white race. So everything that they, say to their members or their movement are, that they are the ultimate warriors, to really mirror what Mubin said. It's the language is the same, the drivers are the same, and the hook, to do something great, to find paradise, and to destroy the people that want to take that away from you. When I was in the movement 30 years ago, Steve, I thought I was saving the world, as I'm sure Mubin did as well, until we realized that what we were doing was actually destroying the world. So, going back to, kind of the secular, mainstream world was actually more beneficial than, the time I spent for 8 years in that movement.
Okay, Marv, follow up on this. Muslims get this question all the time. Is ISIS truly Islamic? So we're going to ask the same question about white supremacists. Is it truly Christian?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, I think. But I think, as Christian was saying, there are movements that are deeply religious. And when they're talking about defending Western values, they mean Western Christendom, right? They mean Judeo-Christian values. They're not just talking in a vacuum.
Although the folks in Charlottesville didn't look like they were too hot on the Judeo part of the Judeo-Christian values.
But this kind of heritage of what white people have given humanity, they feel is being underemphasized, right? So in the U.S., you hear this a lot, where the idea that America is founded on an idea is deeply problematic for them, because they believe, no, it was founded by white people, and those ideas came from white people. So it's not simply that it was founded on an idea. It was founded by a very specific group of people who are now being eroded, and that cultural heritage is being eroded, right? And there are groups like that in Canada where they think that white people are a covenant race, that God himself gave white people prominence, and this secular society is eroding all of that, right? And so it depends kind of what movement you're talking about or what group you're talking about, but that's definitely a kind of ongoing trend, I think. Whether it's truly Christian, that's a different theological question, I think.
Having said all this, Mia, let's not lump everybody into one category here, because let me put this on the record. In an online study of 447 self-proclaimed alt-right members, about half were deemed by researchers to be so-called populists, and the other half white supremacists. Is this an important distinction to make?
It might be important in terms of what social policies that they prefer. I think it's important that as we're lumping together the alt-right, we realize that you're going to have different levels of religiosity between whether they're sovereign citizen or KKK or neo-Nazis or skinheads. I mean, not every single element of what we are terming the alt-right is either going to be extremely Christian. Some will be Christian in terms of the ideology of Christian being white, but they're not necessarily going to church and reading the good book. The populism, I think, reflects the economic insecurity that Christian touched upon at the beginning of the program. So that the idea that people will joke that when you call up an 800 number and you have to oprima dos for Espanol really just irks them. The idea that the United States will no longer be an entirely Anglo-speaking, that come 2025 or 2030, that white people will actually be a minority in the United States, causes this reaction. And so the populism can be very similar to what President Trump was talking about, making America great again, making sure that it's American workers, privileging American citizens. And that's not necessarily just going to be one particular group, but it does correspond to what Amar is saying, the image of the United States as a white Christian country, when in fact the United States is a melting pot, like Canada.
Mubin, let me follow up with you on that reaction. And that is, it's one thing to hold extremist views. It's another thing to make the decision that you're going to go out and bash heads because of it. What drives someone to make that leap from holding the views to violently expressing them?
Yeah, I think this is a difficult question, only because intelligence services and counterterrorism agencies that are watching people who are expressing extremist views, and in some places expressing those views is not illegal, but yet the step to violence can be as short as one step. So one of the things some of the things that I've seen, I think that the most prominent is the idea that you face existential attack. That's the difference between it just being a problem versus it being a problem at your door right now. And the follow-up question, especially for recruiting, is what are you going to do about it? So I think the idea, especially now with far right in Canada, especially talking about the so-called invasion of Islam into Canada, Canada is going to Islam is going to overtake Canada. This idea that Canada is faced with an existential threat is I think is showing us and giving rise to these attacks on Muslims, or the idea that Islam itself needs to be attacked back in retaliation.
Christian, I heard you trying to get in there for a second.
Yeah, I wanted to add into what Mia said, and it was important. And I really think that the populism angle is really the first step of radicalization to extremism and then violent extremism, because so many of these movements hide behind patriotism to really make the message more palatable, to appeal to the average citizen who may or may not be a radical, and it's kind of the first step. It's the entry-level drug, so to speak. As is a sense of pride in your race, and that's the marketing message. That's how they pull people in initially, and then ramp up the message.
Amar?
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And this is where I think things get a little dangerous, because what you're seeing now with a lot of these different, very diverse groups converging is that they've found a wedge issue that does have some popular appeal, namely the Syrian refugee crisis, anti-Islam, ISIS lone wolf attacks, creating more and more fear. So what you're actually having is groups like, rebel media, the alt-right, neo-Nazis, all of these converging around these issues that do have some mainstream support, because if you do a survey of Canadian opinion on refugees, it's somewhere around 50%, and whether you look favorably on
50%.
50% view refugees favorably, right? Mm-hmm. So there are these issues that have mainstream appeal that these groups are now tying into. So you, in a weird way, you're finding, for example, members of rebel media in the same room as neo-Nazis, almost by accident, even though Ezra Levant's Jewish and all these kinds of things, right? And so people are confused why these groups are coalescing. It's because they're finding these mainstream issues where they think, with the support from the White House administration in the White House, that you can actually launch into some more like a place where you're not a subculture anymore.
Christian, I'm trying to get a better handle on why this is happening in what appear to be so much bigger numbers right now. I know in Canada, for example, we took tens of thousands of Syrian refugees. I think, I'm not sure what the final, was it 40,000 the final number?
40,000.
Maybe north of that even. The United States, which is a tenth the size of Canada, 350 million people or so in the United States, and they took 10,000 altogether. How exactly does that spark a fuse that leads to everything we've been seeing?
Well, I think it's the proliferation of the fear rhetoric that we've heard coming out of the administration for now almost 20 months. Hatred is born of ignorance. Fear is its father, and isolation is its mother. We have a large segment of our population in the U.S. that is afraid of what they don't understand, and they're so isolated from it that they've never had a meaningful interaction with the people that they claim to hate or are afraid of. That distills itself sometimes into extremism or extremist violence. And we have an issue right now where we're so disconnected, we're almost operating on two parallel tracks in America, where neither track understands or believes what the other side says. And that's a really dangerous scenario, because there are very few bridges between those.
Mia, besides the Syrian refugee issue, what else might be fueling this in the United States?
I think the driver or the spark was the attack against the in San Bernardino by Omar Mateen and Tafshin Malik. By first Omar Mateen in Orlando and Tafshin Malik in San Bernardino. This idea that perhaps people might be coming into the United States and perpetrating attacks. Initially, the allegation was that Tafshin Malik had been an ISIS bride. In other words, she'd come to the United States in order to radicalize her husband and perpetrate terrorist attacks. This was exacerbated in part during the attacks in France, when of the 12 or 15 attackers, there were rumors that some of them may have entered France as refugees. And so all of a sudden, the entire conversation almost 2 years ago was about whether or not the refugees could be trusted, even though all the data and every piece of evidence showed that for all the attacks that had ever happened, none had involved refugees. And so what we saw is a political exploitation of what was going on at Bataclan in France, in San Bernardino, in Orlando, in order to promote the agenda of the Breitbart people, Steve Bannon, Sebastian Gorka, in order to help Donald Trump get elected. And so much of this isn't based on fact. Much of this is based on fear, exaggeration, and in fact, ignoring the real facts, ignoring the data. It's one of the reasons why the administration has been so antagonistic for research on terrorism. Because research on terrorism, when you show the statistics, basically says, this is not what you need to worry about.
Well, Christian, I wasn't going to raise the President of the United States because every time I do, I get in trouble from some viewers on this program. But
Me too.
You too, eh? Since Mia raised it, let's go there. How much does the current President of the United States have to wear this?
Oh, I think he has to wear it completely. You know, for 18 months, we heard some of the same, you know, bigoted rhetoric that I said 30 years ago when I was a member of the movement, you know, speaking against immigrants or trying to build a wall or, you know, a Muslim ban, things like that are all things that we said, you know, maybe using slightly different words, and they may be using words that are a little bit more appealing to the average American, but I think he has to own it. And I think that all the cabinet, whether they were past or present, have to own it. They created this. Now, that's not to say that we didn't have racism in our country. We absolutely have had it. We've never lived in a post-racial society, and we've been sweeping it under the rug. But all those fires that existed all across our country and even into Canada, on Election Day, it was as if a bucket of gasoline was kicked over, and it ignited a forest fire. And here we are now, where, you know, our 24-hour news cycle is dominated by talk of neo-Nazis and alt-right and white supremacists, and you know, to continue on what Mia was saying, you know, it's true. While jihadists are a threat everywhere, in our country, more people have been killed on American soil by white supremacists than by any other foreign or domestic terrorist threat combined, and yet we still don't call it terrorism.
Mubin, I'd like you to weigh in on a debate that started after Richard Spencer, who was one of these neo-Nazi extremist types, was giving an interview and got punched. Is it okay to punch a Nazi?
Not if you're a public figure. Look, I'm going to echo the thoughts of, you know, my other friends who are also former neo-Nazis, that, you know, punching them in the head, while it looks good and I'm sure it would feel good, it actually feeds into their rhetoric. I mean, they say that, listen, we are marginalized. They want to replace us. They want to beat us down. Look. And Richard Spencer got famous in, you know, well, he was already somewhat there, but I mean, he really, you know, earned his keep, if you will, because of that punch to the head. And for every Nazi everywhere else, it just feeds their rhetoric of, you see, these people are against us. And now what I fear it does is it gives the rebound reaction of, we need to be preemptively violent to prevent us from being punched in the head.
So
nobody in the history of the world has ever changed their racist views because they got punched in the head or hit in the, you know, in the body with a bottle of urine. In fact, Mubin is absolutely correct. They go into these movements because they feel marginalized already. The more we push them away, the more marginalized they become, and the further they go down their hole. And I fully believe that we need to change these people through acts of compassion when they least deserve it, from the people they least deserve it from. And I know that that's not a popular idea, to hug a Nazi, and certainly we should hold them accountable. But what was the most powerful thing to me after these rallies was what we saw in Boston, when 40,000 peaceful protesters surrounded a couple dozen Nazis with candles, and there was no violence, and they were outnumbered. And we showed them that we know they're there, and we're not going to let them do what they do, but we are also not going to treat them the same way that they attack us.
Amar, I'd like you to comment on, once again, Scott A Tran, who had this quote from the Washington Post last month. He said, "The values of liberal and open democracy increasingly appear to be losing ground around the world to those of narrow, xenophobic, ethno-nationalisms and radical Islam, similar to attacks on Republican values by fascists and communists in the 1920s and 30s. But this is not a clash of civilizations, it's a collapse of communities. Ethno-nationalist violent extremism, as well as jihadi terrorism, represent not the resurgence of traditional cultures, but their unraveling. Young people, unmoored from millennial traditions, flail about in search of a social identity that gives personal significance and glory. This is the dark side of globalization. Individuals radicalize while seeking identity in an increasingly flattened world. Do you want to put it up to the dark side of globalization as well?
I mean, the sociologist in me kind of agrees with some of that, but not the others. But I think what he's touching on, and I know he knows the literature quite well, is that we're kind of bounding ahead as youth without any real sense of future and without any real leadership that's kind of interpreting that future for us. And so we're more and more forced to build our own biographies, build our own story, create our own worldview. And that, for some, they thrive in that kind of environment, but for a lot of others, it's a deeply disorienting and troubling kind of place to be, right? And so this is what drives a kind of thirst for certainty, right? A thirst for the black and white, because at least that makes sense. At least, okay, my kind of, the problems that I'm going through are diagnosed in a very simple way that I can understand. So part of it is, yes, this youth identity of, or this youth search for identity and some kind of certainty in a world that is increasingly not making any sense and is increasingly diverse and all of that. So I think part of that is correct. What I disagree with is, I think the undercurrent of that is anti-liberal, right? I think for particularly these neo-Nazi groups and actually jihadist groups as well, it's fundamentally an anti-liberal movement. They're against pluralism, they're against equity and equality, they're against gay rights, they're against women's rights. And so the certainty that's provided in what they're finding in jihadism and neo-Nazism is fundamentally anti-liberal and fundamentally anti-Western. So that's kind of the undercurrent of that, which I slightly disagree with his position on that, I think.
Mia, let me match that quote with another one here. This is from Matt K. Lewis, writing in the Daily Beast. Earlier this month, he writes, the same liberals who worry that we are, quote, creating more terrorists by being overly aggressive on the anti-terrorism front don't seem to worry that they might be, quote, creating more racists by being overly aggressive in their opposition to racism. This is not to say we shouldn't fight against fascism. We should. It is to say that we should fight smart. Sadly, some on the left have taken the bait. This is not to say that left-wing iconoclasm is the moral equivalent of drone strikes, but it is to say that there are some parallels in the way extremists bait us into overreacting in order to grow extremism. What's your view on whether the liberal overreaction on the left is fueling some of this extremist behavior on the right?
Well, there has been an overreaction, especially on campuses like Berkeley, or even here in Atlanta at Emory, that assumption is if you vote for Trump, you're a neo-Nazi. That's absolutely not the case. There are people who voted for Trump, there are people who are Republican, there are people who like the president, and it's not necessarily the case that they're all neo-Nazis. But also the suppression of free speech on campuses, that you're not allowed to have a different position, you're not allowed to discuss certain political views, certainly exacerbating the perception that we've become this overly PC environment, that our youth are very susceptible to any kind of trigger warning, that we have an entire generation of these entitled, young people who just with the 22nd place ribbon think that they're just all winners. And so when they encounter reality and they don't get the job, or they don't succeed necessarily just by the very fact that they tried hard, it's very discombobulating. That feeds into the right's negative view of what they will see as the Antifa movement or the liberal movement. They think that the left is as racist as the right. And of course, getting involved with, whether Blue Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter, it has all complicated the conversation so that the lines are drawn in very fuzzy ways. We need to understand that if we believe in free speech, we believe in free speech, even speech we don't like. Speech that actually encourages violence is the only speech that we can definitely clamp down on. But disinviting people because you don't like what they're going to say, or calling someone a fascist, even though they've been the target of the Pepe and the anti-left, alt-right groups, that's just useless, pointless verbiage. I think it's really important that we understand what's going on with our young people on the left is having an impact on what might be the result for young people on the right.
Okay, in which case, with about a minute and a half to go, I want to hear from Christian and Mubin on, okay, we are where we are. Based on your experience, how do we turn the tide? Christian, you first.
Well, I think we're failing our young people immensely. It does no good to argue ideologically once they're in that space. What we need to do is fix the underlying issues that have pushed them there. So that means supporting young people from the day they're born, being guides as adults instead of dictating what they do. Young people are passionate, they're idealistic, and they want to succeed. So we need to provide more services, better education for these young people so that they don't end up feeling disenchanted or disenfranchised.
Mubin, what would you add to that?
Yeah, easy question, right? I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, we do outnumber the haters by the millions. And it's something that we need to remind ourselves about. And secondly, what are we going to do about it? There are many things we can do. Understanding that I always use a slogan, one team, one fight. It's taken from the military, but I think it applies here as well. That we have a common adversary. It is hate. It is intolerance. It's that black and white thinking. It appeals, it's found in every group across the board. And what we need to do is identify it and treat it. And by identifying it, we mean see where this is occurring, whether it's in schools, whether it's in workplaces. Treat it either by psychosocial counseling, support programs, individually in homes, group activities and social group circles, everything, right from the national level all the way down to the individual parent and child level.
Gotcha. Yeah. I want to thank all four of you for coming on our program tonight and sharing your wisdom on what is one of the more intractable subjects in our country and world today. Thanks to Christian Picciolini in Chicago, co-founder of Life After Hate. Thanks to Mia Bloom in Atlanta, the professor of communication at Georgia State University. To Mubin Sheikh, the ex-CSIS and RCMP operative, and Amar Amarasingham, the senior research fellow at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Thanks so much, everybody. Good to have you on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.